Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. For a Maoist third worldist, dealing with indigenous peoples, dealing with indigeneity, one of the more important things, in my view, speaking as a sociologist, is to respect indigenous spirituality. That is something that is often forgotten when engaging with people who are indigenous. Indigenous spirituality is often connected with the land, but not always. And so it is never good, in my opinion, to begin with preconceptions when meeting an indigenous people or when speaking with an indigenous community, because indigenous people are very diverse. For example, if you travel around the United States, speaking with indigenous people, going, for example, to Native American nations or tribes, many of them are Roman Catholics. And that is because the Roman Catholic Church established missions and schools throughout the United States, put them on Native American reservations, and a large number of Native Americans converted to Roman Catholicism. So there is a huge Roman Catholic population on Native American reservations. The same thing is true to an extent for Native Hawaiians. Again, a large Roman Catholic population with Native Hawaiians. So the picture is not as clear as one might think at first. There are many people who resent that, who resent the fact that the Roman Catholic Church came in and showed a lack of respect to the indigenous people of the United States by pressuring them to convert to a particular religion. There is a lack of tolerance displayed, and I think it is justifiable, to missionaries or to other people who come into their tribes trying to convert them. So, as a result, there is often a suspicion of outsiders. That pressure has more recently come from groups like the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses, who, despite not using the term evangelical, are perhaps the two most evangelical branches of Christianity in the Western world. And both of them began in the United States. And so it is not hard to understand why those two religions in particular would have shown up on Native American reservations, among Native Hawaiians and among the Inuit people of Alaska. It is because of the fact that they are oriented very much toward evangelism, much more so than many of the traditional churches, which used to be very evangelistic, which used to have schools and other evangelical organizations set up on Native American reservations, for example, but no longer do. But the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Mormons, are still very actively involved in evangelism, as I would call it. And there are many Native Americans that I have spoken with that deeply resent the pressure that is being put on them, as they see it, by these Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons to convert to their religions. Now, I would suspect, from having met a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons myself, that they are not intending to put pressure on anyone. They are generally respectful people as individuals. Jehovah's Witnesses are trained to be respectful in their meetings. Mormons, likewise, are trained to be respectful, and most Mormons are entirely unaware of the fact that they share a unfortunate history with the Ku Klux Klan. Yes, they do. And that is reflected in their historical distaste for and prejudice against African Americans and even Native Americans, because the general teaching of Joseph Smith was that the Native Americans who are around today are the bad Native Americans, the darker skinned Native Americans who killed off all the good equals light skinned Native Americans. So Joseph Smith was not a big fan of Native Americans. These days, I don't think that is true. I think there is more respect among Mormons, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for Native Americans than there was in Joseph Smith's time. But still, there is suspicion on the part of many Native Americans toward anybody who comes into their tribe or nation with an apparent attempt to convert them or put any pressure on them whatsoever. So I think that is one dynamic that anybody should consider when relating to Native Americans, is that they live in a world in which they have been subjected to tremendous discrimination, prejudice, and at the same time, an expectation that they convert to people who are regarded by many Native Americans as the white man's religion. The white man's religion, namely Christianity. Since so many Native Americans have become Roman Catholics, that is not so much true now. So many generations have passed. Many Native Americans have lost touch with their original religions, but certainly not all. And some Native Americans have tried to rediscover that heritage. But again, the spirituality of Native Americans is often very distinct from the spirituality of people who are not indigenous to the land. And so when approaching a Native American or when approaching a Native American community, such as a tribe or a nation, one needs to think about very carefully how one is going to address them. Certainly, conscientization is important. For me, it is very important to exercise conscientization. But taking a lesson from the mistakes made by evangelists and that are still being made by evangelists till this day, it is really important that when practicing conscientization, one does not come across as somebody who is proselytizing or somebody who is trying to convert, in effect, a person to revolutionary socialism or communism. That is the easiest way to turn somebody off who is an indigenous person of the Americas. And already there is that hostility. As I mentioned in a previous video, in Hawaii, they have a day called Hate Haole Day. Haole can perhaps best be translated as whitey. And that resentment goes back to the fact that the white people who went to Hawaii were very disrespectful of the ways of the native Hawaiians. And till this day, the majority of native Hawaiians live in relative poverty, while the majority of white people live in relative wealth. I mean, if you can afford to move to Hawaii, which is pretty expensive to do, then you can't be a poor person. But if you are living in Hawaii, if that is where you are from, if you are indigenous to Hawaii, chances are that you are going to be poor. So social class often creates a huge amount of conflict and tension between Native Hawaiian and white people in Hawaii. And what I'm saying can most likely be attributed to many other indigenous parts of the world as well. But I can only talk about my own experience. And even there, I have never been to Hawaii. I have been to areas that were populated by the Inuit people, and I have been to numerous Native American reservations. And so, having spoken with them, I know how sensitive they are. I know how concerned they are with preserving their autonomy. And having a white person show up trying to convert them to anything, whether it is to a new religion or whether it is to communism or revolutionary socialism, is generally seen in a very negative light. And I think for reasons that almost anyone can understand. I mean, the land of the Native Americans, the land of the Native Hawaiians, the land of the Inuit people was stolen. It was stolen by white people. And the first religions to go there were often very, very disrespectful of the ways, of the traditional ways of those people. And that remains so today. Even with all the attempts made to be as sensitive as possible to the ways of indigenous people in the United States, there is inevitably going to be confusion. Because if I am a person who is regarded as white, even though I may define myself, and I do, as a brown person of color, as an Ashkenazi Jew, the fact that I am seen as white is really all that matters. And so I know that the times when I visited Native American reservations, I was always looked upon with suspicion. It took a long time, long conversations, often several visits before I was even trusted to a limited extent by the people on those reservations. And I can understand why. I mean, using empathy, putting myself to an extent in their situations, or at least as best I can, to imagine myself in their situations, I think I would feel the same way. I would not trust me. And so I don't know why anybody else would trust me either. Um, White people have done a really, really awful job of public relations to the indigenous world. We have made ourselves look like jerks. We have behaved like monsters. And to an extent, if you see what is happening in Gaza, we are still behaving like monsters. And so often the expectation is among many indigenous people, including Native Americans, is that if you are a white person and you are on their land, that you are going to behave badly. And that assumption is not only understandable, it is commonly supported because white people generally do behave like jerks on Native American reservations and to Native Hawaiians and to Inuit people. There are still many places around the United States which do not welcome Native Americans, and that is known. They may not have signs on the doors saying no Indians allowed, as they did in the past, but that assumption is still very clear. And so many Native Americans will simply not go there. And so there is a tremendous distrust an estrangement between the colonizers and the colonized, even though my family was not personally among the colonizers. I have benefited from the colonizers' deeds. I have ended up in a position of tremendous privilege and of extraordinary wealth. And I do not like that. I wish I did not have that, because I would like to meet indigenous people like Native Americans on an equal basis, but I can't do that. I mean, I can make believe I'm something other than who I am, but then I'm only pretending, right? So I think it is really important that when anybody goes and deals with an indigenous person, and really I can only speak for myself, having lived in the United States my entire life, have going to Native American reservations, never having gone to Hawaii, having visited Inuit people, but not really spending much time with them, that it is really, really important, especially for somebody like me, who has relatively little connection with indigenous people, that I listen more than talk. And so that is my advice. Listen. Spend most of your time listening. Talk, but use very, very few words. If you want to spread your religion, if you want to be engaging in conscientization, that is good, but listen more than talk. Listening can also be a type of conscientization, because you are showing your respect for the people you are engaged with. And so, again, my view is that it is really important to be sensitive to the people you are talking with. I love indigenous people. I have enormous respect for them, and I wish that I were indigenous myself. As I've said before, I'm sad that I am not, but I can't change reality. I can't change the circumstances of my birth. That is who I am, and that is who I always will be, a non-indigenous person living here in the Americas. But if you are like me, a non-indigenous person living in the United States, please, again, be very, very sensitive to the people you are talking with. Do not pressure them to do anything. Do not pressure them to convert to a religion. Do not pressure them to become communists or revolutionary socialists. The best way you can engage with an indigenous person is by keeping quiet, letting them talk. One thing I have noticed about many indigenous people, many Native Americans, is that they themselves often do not talk that much. They only talk when they have something worthwhile to say. White people, on the other hand, seem to talk all the time. I know that I do. I've been told that I have the gift of gab, and I do. I can talk endlessly. I can be on the phone for 8 or 10 hours, and I've done that. And some people I know who are friends of mine have complained about that. And so I have to be sensitive about that to them, and they are not indigenous. And so I imagine if those people are offended by my constant talk, maybe not offended, but annoyed by my constant talk, I can imagine how much indigenous people would respond to that. So I know what I need to do. Sadly, the last time that I met indigenous people, I did not know what I know now. I was not aware of the importance of being sensitive to the religions of indigenous people, even in cases where those religions are Western religions, like Roman Catholicism, Mormonism, and the Jehovah's Witnesses. but I did not know that it was important to keep quiet. I don't recall that I ever said anything rude. I was always polite. I'm polite by disposition, but I was not aware of the need to be quiet and to listen, to listen, to listen, to listen. Listening, the most important thing. And now, as a Maoist third worldist, I am very much aware of that. And so, in my trips down to Mexico, where I meet Mexica people, the indigenous people of Mexico, and according to the Mexica movement, all Mexicans are Mexica. All Mexicans, to one extent or another, have some indigenous ancestry and are therefore indigenous. And so when I go down to Mexico now, living just 2 miles away from the place, I am extraordinarily sensitive to them. What I notice is that many Americans become the ugly Americans. If you don't know what that term means, it is a term which is worthy to study. Google the ugly American. It's basically where Americans go to someplace outside the United States. It may not even be indigenous. It may be another country like Canada or France or the UK, and expect everything to be the same way as it is in the United States, to expect to be treated in some cases like royalty. I know that now. Fortunately, I learned that as soon as I traveled down here to the Rio Grande Valley. So I am capable, I think, of relating to Native Americans and to Mexica people in Hawaii, in Mexico, in a respectful way, not in a way in which I expect them to behave according to my standards, which is what I see among many Americans who go down to Mexico. They expect everything to fit the standards of Americans. So I've seen it myself. I have a friend in Mexico who owns a leather goods store. He is a very, very smart guy, has a family, and he is not poor. He's not he's not wealthy either, but he's not a poor person. He does very good business at his store. And his store is really nice. He has really, really good leather goods in his store. But I saw this one person come in and complain that his prices were too high. So what did I do? I turned to this other American and I said, "How dare you say that? How dare you say that?" He looked at me with amazement. He couldn't believe, I guess, that an American was saying this to him. But I said, "How dare you say that? This guy is my friend. The prices here are 10 times lower than anything you will find in the United States. So please do not complain about my friend's prices." At that point, he simply left the store. Righteous indignation. So again, be sensitive, be careful, especially with indigenous people. Do not expect them to be like you. Be quiet as much as possible. Only speak when you have something to say. Listen more than speak. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.